in the glowing reception hall at Blackwood Crest. I stared at my place card. Right below my name read two words, non-priority. My family never knew my envelope held a $15,000 check, built on 7 months of frugal living and weekend shifts. When I grabbed my gift off the table, they thought I was ruining my sister's big day. Truthfully, I just stopped letting them use my money to buy themselves a spot. The air inside the grand reception hall of the Blackwood Crest wedding resort near Asheville tasted like sponge sugar, expensive champagne, and curated perfection. It was a cinematic sweep of a room, the kind of space designed specifically to make you feel small if you did not belong. Massive crystal chandeliers dripped light over velvet-draped tables, catching the gold rims of imported flutes and the crisp lapels of custom tuxedos. The entire space hummed with a glittering, untouchable glamour. I am Sheila Newman. I am 34 years old, and right now, I was standing perfectly still in front of the towering, floral-draped seating chart, staring at a small piece of heavy ivory cardstock that had just reordered my entire universe. The place card was undeniably elegant. It was embossed with gold foil and bore my name in sweeping, expensive calligraphy. But it was the text printed directly beneath my name, in a sharp, unembellished, unapologetic serif font. That held my gaze and froze the blood in my veins. Non-priority. I blinked, the glittering lights of the ballroom momentarily blurring. I looked at the cards arranged around mine. There were aunts from out of state, distant cousins who had not spoken to the family in a decade, business associates of my sister's new husband. I scanned dozens of names. None of them bore this subtitle. Just me, the biological sister of the bride. A familiar waft of jasmine and expensive. Stiff hairspray announced my mother before she even spoke a word. Elaine Newman materialized at my shoulder, slipping through the crowd of tuxedoed men and silk-clad women with practiced ease. Her smile was brilliantly fixed for the room, a flawless mask of maternal joy, but her voice was a low, sweet hiss meant only for my ears. "Sheila, darling," she murmured. Her manicured fingers gripped my upper arm, the pressure just tight enough to threaten a bruise beneath the fabric of my dress. "Do not make a face. It is just an internal planner classification. Keep your voice down and do not make a scene. People are looking." I did not raise my voice. I did not move a single muscle in my face. I just looked from the card to her perfectly powdered complexion. "An internal planner classification," I repeated, the words tasting like dry ash in my mouth. "Printed on the display card, placed in the grand foyer, for absolutely everyone to see. It is a logistical thing, Sheila. A simple sorting metric for the catering staff. Please do not turn this into one of your dramatic moments. Just find your table and sit down before the grand entrance." She released my arm, smoothed the non-existent wrinkles on her emerald green mother-of-the-bride gown, and glided away to greet a local politician as if she had not just casually slid a cold knife right between my ribs. I stood there for another long moment. The string quartet in the corner began playing a sweeping, upbeat melody. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the celebration raged on around me. I took my card and began the walk to my seat. I followed the numbers. Table 1 was the magnificent sweetheart table, overflowing with white orchids. Tables 2 through 5 were reserved for immediate family and the bridal party, stationed directly under the warmth of the central chandelier. I walked past them. I kept walking past the extended family, past the college friends, past the secondary business partners. I walked until the floral centerpieces grew noticeably smaller and the heavy linen tablecloths gave way to something slightly less refined. I finally found my seat. It was pushed against the far back wall, practically grazing the heavy, swinging doors of the kitchen. Every few seconds, those wooden doors would bang open, letting out a cacophony of clattering plates, shouting line cooks, and the sharp, industrial scent of commercial dish soap. It was a position that required absolutely no explanation. It was a physical manifestation of my place in this family, a boundary line drawn in imported linen and silver-plated forks. I was the back room. I was the utility closet. The weight of my clutch suddenly felt unbearable. It dragged down on my wrist like an anchor. Inside that small satin bag sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside that envelope was a cashier's check for $15,000. It was not just money. It was 7 months of my life packaged into paper. It was weekend shifts I took on instead of sleeping. It was canceled dinners with friends, mended winter coats worn for a third season, and a relentless, exhausting hope. I had convinced myself that this time, if I gave enough, if I sacrificed enough to help my sister and her new husband secure the down payment on their dream condo after the wedding, I would finally be viewed as an equal. I thought this gift would buy me a seat at the table. Instead, I was sitting by the service doors, labeled like defective freight. I felt a sudden shift in the air, a presence beside me, and I looked up. Lorraine Vale, the mother of the groom, was standing near the edge of my assigned table. She was an imposing woman, steeped in old hospitality money, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She had stopped to adjust the strap of her couture gown, but her gaze snagged on my face. She saw the rigid set of my jaw, and then her eyes dropped to the place card I was still clutching in my right hand. I held perfectly still as I watched her read it. Sela Newman, non-priority. Lorraine's eyes flicked back up to mine. The politely distant warmth she usually carried in social settings vanished completely. It was replaced by a swift, unmistakable flash of shock, followed immediately by a dangerous narrowing of her eyes. She did not say a word to me. She did not offer a comforting smile or a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, but the microscopic tightening of her jaw planted a definitive, ringing signal in the air between us. Someone else saw this. Someone entirely outside the Newman family matrix recognized that this was not normal. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty. Lorraine gave me a tight, curt nod, turned on her heel, and moved back toward the center of the room, her posture rigid and her mind clearly racing. I stood alone by the swinging kitchen doors. The noise of the kitchen staff bled into the elegant music of the string quartet. I did not cry. Crying was for people who believed a mistake had been made, for people who thought there was a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with tears and communication. There was no mistake here. The cruelty was the point. The humiliation was by design. They wanted me here, but they wanted me in my place. I looked at the card one last time. The heavy cardstock felt rigid and unforgiving against my fingertips. I did not tear it into pieces. I simply folded it cleanly in half, right down the middle of the word priority, and dropped it into my clutch, letting it rest right next to the envelope holding $15,000. A chilling clarity washed over me, numbing the sharp sting of betrayal and leaving behind something hard, cold, and meticulously sharp. If my family had already assigned me a label, if they had already decided exactly what my worth was in this glittering room, then perhaps it was time I decided exactly who my monumental gift truly belonged to. I had paid the price of admission, but I was refusing the seat. To understand how I ended up in this corner, pushed against the kitchen doors with a label of worthlessness stamped by my own mother, you have to understand the specific, quiet mathematics of my family. And to truly understand that, we have to pull the curtain back and return to exactly 7 months ago. I work as a contracts compliance analyst at Northline Civic Benefits Group in Columbus, Ohio. My entire career is built on the quiet, meticulous art of reading the fine print. I spend 40 hours a week staring at hundreds of pages of polite, sanitized corporate jargon, hunting for the hidden clauses, the subtle loopholes, and the quiet, legal ways one party is preparing to exploit the other. It is a profession that demands absolute precision, a steady, unbothered heartbeat, and the learned ability to see the ugly, calculating truth buried beneath a very expensive, very polite surface. Ironically, dissecting corporate deception was the perfect training ground for surviving the Newman family. I did not grow up in a chaotic home filled with screaming matches or shattered plates. The cruelty in our house was never loud or physically violent. It was entirely administrative. My mother, Elaine, lived and breathed exclusively for optics. She constructed our family image the way an ambitious architect builds a grand monument, meticulously ensuring the public facade was spotless and gleaming, no matter how hollow and structurally unsound the interior actually felt. My father, Martin, existed as a fading ghost in his own house. He retreated into perpetual silence, terrified of sparking any conflict that might ripple my mother's perfectly curated social pond. Then there was my older brother, Cole. Cole looked at human beings the exact same way a ruthless stockbroker looked at emerging markets. Every single relationship he maintained was a carefully calculated transaction. If you could not offer him a tangible return on his investment, if you could not elevate his status, introduce him to the right network, or pad his wallet, you simply ceased to exist in his ledger. And then there was Rowan, my younger sister. Rowan was the kind of person who effortlessly altered the gravity of a room the second she walked into it. She was blindingly beautiful, razor sharp, and worked in brand partnerships for a highly sought-after creative studio. She knew exactly how to angle her chin to catch the ambient light, how to calibrate her laugh so it sounded like wind chimes, and how to position herself so she was always, inevitably, the dead center of every single photograph. She was the glowing, magnetic sun of our family solar system, and the rest of us were just planetary bodies explicitly designated to orbit her warmth. Within this rigid, unspoken structure, I was not the dramatically neglected child you see in tragic movies. I was not locked in a basement or denied meals. My role was far more insidious and much harder to explain to outsiders without sounding petty. I was the convenient child. I was the human equivalent of a reliable Swiss Army knife kept in a dusty, forgotten glove compartment, completely ignored until someone desperately needed a tool to fix a mess. When Cole brazenly messed up his complicated tax filings and faced a terrifying federal audit, my phone rang at 11 at night. When my grandmother needed a ride to a grueling 4-hour cardiology appointment because everyone else was miraculously swamped with highly important meetings, my phone rang. When my mother's premium homeowner insurance policy had a massive billing discrepancy that required yelling at hostile customer service representatives, I was the one explicitly tasked with sitting on hold for 3 hours to resolve it. I remember one specific Thanksgiving dinner, roughly 3 years ago. I had spent 14 continuous hours in the suffocating heat of the kitchen, meticulously brining a massive turkey, baking 3 different intricate pies completely from scratch, and anxiously coordinating the precise timing of every single side dish so the sprawling holiday meal would be utterly flawless. Rowan arrived a mere 20 minutes before we all sat down to eat, breezy and glowing, carrying a single, store-bought bottle of red wine featuring a trendy, minimalist label. When we finally gathered around the heavy oak table, my mother raised her crystal glass and initiated a toast. She spent 5 uninterrupted minutes breathlessly praising Rowan's recent minor promotion at the studio and complimenting her supposedly exquisite, refined taste in wine. She did not mention the elaborate feast sitting right in front of her. When I quietly stood up and started clearing the tower of empty plates, Cole simply handed me his soiled linen napkin without even bothering to look up from his glowing phone screen. It was a perfectly choreographed, silent dance of utter dismissal, and I was the only person in the room who actually felt the sharp sting of the blade. In the Newman household, the economy of affection was strictly regulated and highly biased. Rowan was showered with endless praise simply for glowing and existing. Cole was afforded deep, unquestioning respect because he aggressively chased wealth and projected power. I, on the other hand, was assigned the unglamorous, heavy lifting of actual life. I was fully expected to manage the sudden crises, smooth out the exhausting logistical nightmares, and then quietly, obediently recede into the background before the victory photos were taken. There were no emotional thank you notes for the convenient child. There was only the heavy, unspoken expectation of duty. For years, I survived this crushing dynamic by telling myself a very specific, very protective lie. I analyzed my family the way I analyzed a flawed, lopsided contract, desperately searching for a charitable interpretation. I told myself they were simply not good at expressing warm emotions. I reasoned that they leaned on me so heavily because I was the capable one, the strong one, the one who absolutely did not break or cry under pressure. I convinced myself that my relentless utility was actually a unique, unspoken form of love. I thought that by being endlessly helpful, flawlessly patient, and relentlessly dependable, I was slowly but surely building an undeniable, airtight case for my own inherent value. I clung to this pathetic illusion with the sheer desperation of a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. I truly believed that if I just did one more massive favor, fixed one more catastrophic problem, or handled one more tedious chore, the scales of justice would finally tip in my favor. I believed that one day, my mother and my siblings would look at me and finally see a beloved daughter and a cherished sister, a person worthy of the center stage, rather than just a highly efficient free crisis manager. That fragile, desperate hope crystallized into a hard, singular objective the day Rowan officially announced her engagement to Andrew Vale. The announcement happened at a high-end, dimly lit steakhouse downtown. Rowan held up her left hand, the massive diamond catching the ambient restaurant lighting, and my mother actually gasped, her eyes immediately calculating the carat weight and the corresponding social leverage. Cole immediately started asking Andrew about his family's commercial real estate portfolio, aggressively probing for investment angles. I sat at the very edge of the leather booth, watching them form a tight, impenetrable circle of excitement and ambition. I was physically present, but socially invisible. The Vale family was practically Midwestern hospitality royalty. They owned and operated a highly lucrative, rapidly expanding chain of boutique luxury properties based out of Indianapolis. To Andrew, this immense wealth and high status was just his normal, everyday life. To my mother, Elaine, this engagement was a sudden, glorious promotion to the absolute major leagues of society, the very moment the engagement became official. The atmosphere in our family shifted permanently. My mother instantly treated the upcoming wedding not as a joyous celebration of two people falling in love, but as an aggressive, meticulously planned military campaign for total social dominance. Every single detail, from the thread count of the cocktail napkins to the vintage of the dinner wine, had to project a flawless image of generational wealth and impeccable taste to match the intimidating Vale family standard. But while my mother saw the wedding as a high-stakes social battleground, I viewed it through an entirely different lens. I saw it as a lifeline. I looked at the rapidly mounting chaos, the endless, exhausting logistical hurdles, and the immense, crushing pressure placed on my sister's shoulders, and I made a fatal, heartbreaking miscalculation. I saw this grand, opulent wedding as my final, undeniable opportunity to prove my worth and secure my rightful place in my own bloodline. I thought that if I could be the invisible architect of their smooth transition into this glamorous new life, if I could provide the ultimate, selfless, massive contribution, the family would have no choice but to acknowledge my absolute importance. I firmly believed this was my ultimate chance to stop being the utility closet and finally become part of the main house. I did not realize until it was entirely too late that by trying to buy my way into their hearts with desperate acts of service, I was just setting myself up to be the most easily discarded prop in their elaborate theatrical production. The catalyst arrived on a random Tuesday evening in late October. Rowan called me while I was boiling water for pasta, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic, frantic pitch. She was overwhelmed by mortgage pre-approval applications and the skyrocketing real estate market in Indianapolis. "We just want a place to start our real life," she had sighed into the receiver, sounding genuinely exhausted. "But securing a decent condo right now feels completely impossible without a massive cash cushion. The bidding wars are insane." She did not explicitly ask me for money. She did not have to. My brain, hardwired by decades of conditioning, immediately categorized her anxiety as a structural problem I was uniquely obligated to solve. I wanted to give her something that would actually matter, something that would leave a permanent, concrete mark on her new life. The very next morning, during my 30-minute lunch break at the office, I opened a new high-yield savings account. I did not give it a formal title on the banking portal, but in my head, it was strictly designated as the Rowan House Fund. I set a rigid, uncompromising target of $15,000, with the wedding exactly 7 months away. The sheer math of the endeavor was brutal. It required me to aggressively squirrel away more than $2,000 every single month, a figure that wildly exceeded my normal disposable income. To bridge that massive financial gap, I effectively became a ghost in my own life. I reached out to a former colleague who ran a boutique compliance firm and begged for any overflow contract work they could spare. Suddenly, my weekends ceased to exist. After working my standard 40 hours a week at Northline, I would spend my Saturdays and Sundays hunched over my scratched kitchen table, auditing dense employee handbooks and environmental safety manuals for small, underfunded regional nonprofits. The text in those documents was microscopic. The subject matter was profoundly dry, and the pay was utterly depressing when calculated by the hour. My eyes burned constantly, and my lower back developed a permanent, dull ache. But every time a vendor invoice cleared, I immediately transferred the funds into the new account. $300 here, $450 there. I watched the balance tick upward with a grim, obsessive satisfaction. The austerity measures I implemented bled into every single corner of my daily routine. I stopped buying fresh produce and lived on cheap black coffee, bulk rice, and discount chicken to cut my grocery bill down to $60 a week. I deleted every rideshare application from my phone, forcing myself to walk or take the city bus in the freezing wind just to save $20 a week on commuting. When December hit Columbus with a brutal, biting frost, the main zipper on my heavy winter wool coat finally snapped in half, and the inner silk lining tore beyond simple repair. Instead of walking into a department store and buying a new one, which would have set me back at least $200, I spent a Friday night sitting on my worn sofa with a needle, thick black thread, and a cheap replacement zipper from a local craft shop. I pricked my fingers until they literally bled, cursing quietly in the empty room. But I fixed the coat. I stopped saying yes to Friday night drinks with my coworkers. I politely declined invitations to birthday dinners, claiming I was absolutely swamped with massive projects at work. It was technically the truth, but it felt like a hollow, isolating lie. I watched my social circle slowly contract, my friends eventually giving up their attempts to pull me out of my apartment. I was building an invisible, incredibly expensive bridge toward my family, brick by agonizing brick, and I was entirely alone in the cold while doing it. This $15,000 was never just currency to me. It was a heavy, undeniable anchor in my exhausted, sleep-deprived mind. That growing account balance was absolute proof that I was not just a spectator standing on the periphery of my sister's world. I wanted to show up for her, not just with utility, not just with a red pen and a knack for organizing vendor spreadsheets, but with tangible, undeniable love. I firmly believed that handing her that sum of money would definitively prove I was an essential pillar of her life. And Rowan, whether she consciously realized it or not, expertly kept me on the hook during those grueling months, whenever the sheer exhaustion felt too heavy to carry, whenever my vision blurred from staring at PDF documents at 2 a.m. My phone would light up with a text message from her. "You are literally the only person I trust with all this dense vendor paperwork," she would write, attaching yet another 50-page catering contract for me to review for hidden cancellation clauses. A few weeks later, after I spent 5 hours fighting with a rental company over a billing error for the reception chairs, she sent another message. "I would be a complete and total mess without you keeping me grounded." They were tiny, fleeting morsels of validation, but to a starving person, a simple crumb feels exactly like a feast. Those brief, perfectly timed texts fueled my desperate delusion. They convinced me that beneath her surface-level obsession with color palettes and floral arrangements, a genuine, profound bond existed between us. I believed she saw my effort. I believed she valued my sacrifice. This brings me to a Friday night, exactly 1 week before the wedding was scheduled to take place. I was sitting alone at my small dining table. The apartment was completely silent except for the low, rhythmic hum of the old refrigerator. My laptop was open, illuminating my tired face with the harsh blue light of a dense regulatory compliance audit for a regional dental supply company. It was the final freelance contract I needed to complete the fund. Beside my laptop sat a heavy, cream-colored envelope. I had visited a specialty stationery store specifically to buy it. I had spent 20 minutes practicing my handwriting on scrap paper before carefully writing her name and his name on the front in thick black ink. It was empty at that exact moment, waiting for the bank to open on Monday morning so I could finally request the official cashier's check. I stretched my stiff neck and picked up my phone to check the time. It was well past midnight. I opened a social media application out of sheer, exhausted muscle memory. The very first thing that loaded at the top of my screen was a fresh story from Rowan. It was a chaotic, glittering video shot in a dimly lit, incredibly expensive cocktail lounge in downtown Indianapolis. She was surrounded by her entire bridal party, holding a martini glass adorned with a crackling sparkler. The girls were laughing, leaning into the frame, their faces flushed with excitement and expensive alcohol. The caption typed across the center of the video read, "Surrounded by my absolute favorite people in the entire world. Let the countdown begin." The short video looped again and again, the sparkler throwing harsh, bright light across her joyful face. I set my phone down on the scratched wood, right next to my pristine practice envelope. The contrast in that room was suffocating. I was sitting in the dark, destroying my eyesight and isolating myself to literally buy her a foundation for her future, while she was broadcasting to the entire world that her favorite people were already exactly where she wanted them, standing right inside the frame. The official bridal party announcement dropped on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, waiting for a massive compliance file to finish downloading from a secure server, when the social media notification popped up on my phone. Rowan had posted a carefully curated carousel of photographs. The lighting in the images was that perfect, manufactured golden hour glow that makes everything look expensive and cinematic. 6 women, all clad in matching blush silk robes, were holding crystal coupes filled with bubbling champagne. They were laughing effortlessly, their heads thrown back in synchronized joy, posing on a sprawling balcony overlooking the city skyline. The caption beneath the photo was remarkably simple, yet it cut deeper than any physical weapon ever could. "My girls, the only ones I need by my side to tie the knot." I scrolled slowly through the images. I zoomed in on the glowing, flawless faces. There were childhood friends, college roommates, and 2 girls she had met through her creative studio just last year. 6 friends, 0 sisters. My chest tightened immediately, a dull, incredibly familiar ache spreading rapidly beneath my ribs. It was not just an oversight or a casual omission. To post that specific phrase, to broadcast that imagery to hundreds of people, was a highly public declaration of our family boundary lines. The following morning, I called Rowan. I tried my hardest to keep my voice light, actively stripping away any hint of resentment or accusation. I asked her about the bridal party selection, phrasing it as a casual question about the weekend logistics and who would be staying in the primary hotel suite. There was a brief, heavily loaded silence on the other end of the line. "I just really wanted to keep the circle tightest for the getting ready photos," she finally said, her tone suddenly adopting a defensive, corporate crispness that she usually reserved for difficult clients. "Just the girls who match the current energy and vibe of the weekend." Before I could even attempt to process the word vibe in relation to my own sister, I heard another sharp voice in the background. My mother must have been sitting in the same room. The phone shuffled noisily against an ear, and Elaine's distinct, commanding voice took over the connection. "Selah, darling, Please do not turn a purely aesthetic choice into a personal issue, my mother instructed, her voice completely devoid of warmth. The bridal party needs a very specific, cohesive look for the getting ready photos. You are family. You do not need a matching robe to prove it. You understand. I did understand, though absolutely not in the way she meant. That cohesive visual look was further cemented 3 days later when the official wardrobe instructions for the immediate family arrived in my email inbox. The family was assigned a strict, regal emerald green color palette. My mother had commissioned a stunning custom gown in the vibrant shade. My father and Cole had purchased matching emerald silk ties to wear with their charcoal suits. My email, however, contained an entirely different, highly specific directive. I was explicitly instructed to purchase and wear a slate blue cocktail dress. When I immediately texted my mother to ask if there had been an administrative mix-up regarding the color palette, her reply appeared on my screen within seconds. No mix-up. We just need the core family portraits to look cleaner around the edges. Slate blue is a lovely neutral. It will blend nicely into the background. Cleaner, background. The words were impeccably polite, wrapped in the guise of wedding planning perfection. But they carried the freezing temperature of a winter blizzard. I was not just being excluded, I was being actively camouflaged so as not to disrupt their perfect tableau. Despite being surgically excised from the symbolic, highly visible aspects of the wedding, my physical presence was constantly demanded for the ugly, operational reality of it. The glamorous aesthetic choices excluded me completely, but the exhausting administrative disasters belonged entirely to me. When the luxury printing company catastrophically botched the return addresses on 200 premium, gold foil invitations, Rowan did not call her bridesmaids in their blush silk robes to help fix it. She called me, hyperventilating in a sheer panic. I spent 4 consecutive hours navigating brutal highway traffic across 3 different counties to retrieve the corrected batch from a secondary industrial warehouse. When the vendor providing the intricate overhead floral lighting suddenly altered their liability clause at the 11th hour, I was the one instructed to read the dense 30-page legal document, flag the exorbitant penalty fees, and draft a firm, legally sound email for my mother to send from her own account to look authoritative. I was routinely dispatched to the chaotic wholesale fabric district on rainy Tuesday afternoons just to secure 5 different spools of imported velvet ribbon, because the planner needed physical samples to test against the table linens, and nobody else had the time. I was a ghost who was only allowed to materialize in their world when heavy lifting or problem-solving was required. This deliberate segregation extended deep into my mother's home. One quiet Sunday morning, I dropped by to deliver the finalized guest transportation manifest I had spent my entire weekend organizing. The house was seemingly empty. I walked straight into the kitchen to leave the folder and saw my mother's tablet resting on the marble island, the screen glowing brightly. She had left a massive, complex seating spreadsheet open. I stepped closer, my analytical brain naturally drawn to the organized data. It was intensely color-coded. The Vale family guests were highlighted in a soft, prestigious gold. The Newman extended family and close family friends were shaded in a pale green. I scrolled down the screen with my index finger, searching for my own row just out of sheer curiosity. When I found it, my stomach plummeted into my shoes. Next to my name, in the designated notes column, there was a strange, bolded symbol, a small, solid black triangle that appeared absolutely nowhere else on the entire document. I did not have the time to decipher what the code meant. The sharp, rapid click of my mother's designer heels sounded aggressively on the hardwood floor of the hallway, and she rushed into the kitchen. Her hand shot out instantly, snapping the magnetic leather cover over the screen with a loud, aggressive crack. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She simply asked if I had finished the shuttle schedule, her eyes deliberately and rigidly avoiding mine. Cole, true to his fiercely opportunistic nature, found his own way to capitalize on my designated role as the family utility vehicle. 2 weeks before the wedding ceremony, He was finalizing the chaotic logistics for Andrew's lavish bachelor weekend in Miami. He called me while I was exhausted and grocery shopping, his voice carrying that arrogant, presumptive tone he always used when negotiating business deals. He explained that the boutique company transporting the specialty liquor for their private yacht rental required an immediate, certified wire transfer to release the pallets, and his primary checking account was temporarily locked due to a suspicious international fraud alert. Just front the cash for me right now. Sela. It is roughly $800. I will wire it right back to your account on Monday morning when the bank clears my security flag, he demanded, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. I sent the money while standing in the cheap produce aisle, sacrificing the funds I had specifically set aside for my own monthly electric bill. Monday morning came and went. Then Tuesday. When I finally sent a highly polite, gentle reminder text on Thursday, he left me on red. He treated my money the exact same way he treated my time as an unlimited, entirely free resource that required no gratitude and absolutely no repayment. The final, quiet blow of that month did not even come from my own blood. It came entirely by accident from a complete stranger. I was tasked with dropping off a massive, heavy box of customized welcome bags at the downtown hotel where the bridal party was getting their hair and makeup trials done. One of the bridesmaids, a tall blonde named Kendra, was sent down to the lobby to meet me and take the boxes up to the suite. She was bubbly, friendly, and entirely unaware of the complex, deeply toxic ecosystem of the Newman family. As I handed over the heavy cardboard box, my arms shaking slightly from the weight, she offered a bright, sympathetic smile. Rowan mentioned you have been working so incredibly hard on the vendor side of things, Kendra said cheerfully, adjusting her grip on the box. She told us the other night at dinner that you do not really fit the main table energy, but you are just so incredibly suited for the operational side of the event. It is so great that you have your own special way to contribute behind the scenes, the main table energy, the operational side. Hearing my sister's precise, coldly curated corporate vocabulary repeated back to me by a smiling stranger felt like a physical, brutal strike directly to the center of my chest. It was a perfectly encapsulated, horrific summary of my entire existence within my family. I smiled tightly at Kendra, my face feeling like a cracked porcelain mask. I handed over the last canvas bag, turned around, and walked back to my car on unsteady legs. I sat behind the steering wheel in the dark parking garage for a very long time, staring blankly at the stained concrete wall. The pain was sharp, acute, and suffocatingly heavy. Yet, instead of getting angry, instead of marching upstairs and demanding the basic human respect I deserved, I retreated deep into the familiar, pathetic comfort of my own desperate delusions. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white and forced myself to breathe evenly. I told myself that the immense pressure of weddings makes people crazy. I fiercely rationalized that the terrifying pressure to impress the wealthy Vale family had temporarily warped my mother and sister, turning them into these cold, calculating, image-obsessed versions of themselves. I clung desperately to the thought of the secret, monumental gift resting safely inside my apartment. I fiercely believed that when the chaos finally settled, when the pristine white dress was packed away in a preservation box and the grand social performance was finally over, handing them that massive sum of money would shatter this awful, painful dynamic forever. My unwavering loyalty, quantified by months of silent suffering, ruined weekends, and intense financial sacrifice, would act as the ultimate equalizer. I convinced myself I just had to survive the humiliation until the gift envelopes were opened. The shift in the atmosphere happened exactly 14 days before the ceremony. It started with my mother's sudden, intense fascination with banking logistics, a topic she had historically found incredibly tedious. I was sitting at the kitchen island in my parents' home, meticulously proofreading the final ceremony programs with a red pen, when Elaine leaned over my shoulder. "About your little gift for Rowan," she began, her tone feigning a light, casual curiosity. "Are you planning to give them a physical check, or is it a direct wire transfer? Because if it is a check, We really need to know if the funds will clear within 48 hours. I stopped writing. I stared at the thick cardstock in front of me, my mind struggling to process the bizarre question. Usually, a wedding gift is a sentiment, a surprise meant to be opened after the honeymoon. You do not ask about the clearing times of a wedding present as if you are auditing a corporate merger. It will be a cashier's check, I replied slowly, keeping my voice carefully neutral. It is guaranteed funds. It clears immediately. Elaine exhaled a sharp, highly visible breath of relief. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Just make sure you hand it directly to the coordinator at the reception so it does not get misplaced in the card box. 2 days later, my brother Cole cornered me in the driveway as I was loading heavy boxes of customized cocktail napkins into the trunk of my car. He leaned against the side of the vehicle, checking the face of his heavy luxury watch. You know, the Vale family is completely outfitting the new Indianapolis condo for them, he said casually. Though Cole never said a single word casually, every sentence he spoke was a calculated chess move. They bought a custom Italian leather sectional and top-tier kitchen appliances. Thousands of dollars just in shipping. He looked at me pointedly, his eyes cold and assessing. We cannot look like the poor, uncultured relatives here. Selah, the Newman side has to bring something comparable to the table to look good. We need a solid optical counterbalance. I just nodded, assuming he was talking about some grand, expensive gesture he and my parents were secretly planning to present. I assumed they were finally stepping up. I had absolutely no idea he was talking about my own bank account. The feeling that something was structurally wrong deepened during the final bridal luncheon. I was only at the country club because the florist had delivered the wrong shade of table runners, and I was dispatched to intercept the delivery van at the loading dock. As I walked through the grand foyer, hidden temporarily behind a towering floral display, I heard my mother holding court in the adjacent private dining room. Her voice carried clearly over the clinking of heavy silver on fine china. Oh, yes, Martin and I are just so incredibly thrilled. Elaine laughed, a bright, melodic, entirely artificial sound. The Newman family is providing a very substantial contribution to the house fund. It will give the kids a massive head start on the mortgage. My stomach contracted violently. She was using my blood, my sweat, and my $15,000 as her own personal social currency. She was packaging my silent sacrifice and slapping a Newman family logo right on the front of it to impress Lorraine Vale and her wealthy friends. When I brought it up to Rowan later that evening, trying to gauge if she actually knew our mother was taking public credit for my gift, my sister just waved a manicured hand dismissively. Do not worry about Mom and her aggressive public relations spin. Rowan smiled, her eyes slightly unfocused as she scrolled through her phone. After the weekend is over, all the pieces will fall into place. It will all make sense. It was an oddly rehearsed phrase. It did not sound comforting. It sounded exactly like a corporate deflection designed to pacify an anxious shareholder. It made my skin crawl, but it was not quite enough to make me suspect the absolute magnitude of the lie they were building. The cracks in the facade became truly visible to outsiders exactly 3 days before the wedding. The bridal party was having their final dress fitting at a high-end boutique downtown. Naturally, I was not invited inside to drink champagne and take aesthetic photographs. I was out on the sweltering sidewalk, wrestling 4 massive, heavy garment bags into the back of an SUV. I paused to wipe the sweat from my forehead and turned around to find Lorraine Vale standing just a few feet away, watching me intently. The mother of the groom had stepped out for some fresh air, completely escaping the chaotic energy of the boutique. She looked at my flushed face, the heavy bag slung over my shoulder, and the incredibly detailed logistical clipboard tight in my hand. You have been running around like a marathoner all week, Selah. Lorraine noted, her sharp, intelligent eyes studying my exhausted posture. You must be the maid of honor. I do not think I saw your name on the program draft, but given the way you are managing every single moving part of this event, it is the only thing that makes sense. I froze, the thick plastic hanger digging painfully into the palm of my hand. No, I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. I am just a guest. And the sister of the bride. Of course. Lorraine physically recoiled. It was a microscopic movement. Just a slight, sudden pull backward of her shoulders. But for a woman of her immense poise and breeding, it was the exact equivalent of a loud, shocked gasp. She did not offer a polite platitude. She did not try to smooth over the awkwardness. She just stared at me in total silence, her sharp mind clearly running backward, reevaluating every single interaction she had witnessed between my family and me over the past 6 months. Inside the planning sphere, the tension was equally thick. Leona Price, the high-priced wedding planner, was a seasoned master of diplomacy. But during our final walkthrough of the reception space, her professional mask slipped dramatically whenever we reached the topic of the seating chart. Specifically, my table assignment. Leona would suddenly avoid all eye contact. She would shuffle the pages of her heavy linen-bound binder, her gaze darting uncomfortably to the floor. And Miss Newman will be seated at table. She would clear her throat nervously. Table 42. She said the number as if it tasted sour in her mouth. It was the distinct, deeply uncomfortable hesitation of a professional who had been given an ugly, classless directive by a client and was forced to execute it against her own better judgment. She knew a secret I did not. The final devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Thursday night, just 48 hours before I was supposed to put on my slate blue dress and blend into the background. I had gone to my parents' house to drop off the final master vendor contact list. The front door was unlocked, so I walked in quietly, sliding my wet shoes off in the grand foyer. The house was entirely dark, save for the warm, yellow light spilling from the kitchen archway at the end of the hall. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps silent on the thick Persian runner. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. My mother and Cole were standing by the massive marble island, their voices hushed, but carrying with terrifying clarity in the quiet house. "Are you absolutely sure she is not going to pull out at the last minute?" Cole asked, his tone laced with a genuine, frantic anxiety I had never heard from him before. "Because the escrow documents are already being drafted by their lawyers. If the Newman side defaults on that capital on Monday morning, Andrew is going to ask questions we absolutely cannot answer." Elaine let out a dismissive, arrogant scoff. She took a slow sip of her red wine. "Please, Cole. You know exactly how she is. She is completely desperate to feel included. As long as Sela brings the envelope right on time, the rest will run itself." I stopped breathing. The air in the hallway turned to solid ice in my lungs. I did not move a single muscle. I did not step forward to confront them. I simply turned around and walked silently back out of the front door, stepping directly into the freezing rain. As I sat in the driver's seat of my cold car, gripping the steering wheel until my hands cramped, the terrifying, grotesque reality of the situation finally settled over me. They were not just eagerly anticipating my gift. They had already spent it. They had weaponized my desperate, pathetic need for family connection and turned it into hard collateral for a real estate transaction. They had built an entire financial and social promise to the Vale family, using my bank account as the foundation. Long before I even received an invitation in the mail, they had constructed a massive, glittering lie, and they fully expected me to blindly fund it. The morning of the wedding arrived with a crisp, mocking brilliance. The sky over the Blackwood Crest resort was a flawless, piercing blue. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I walked across the manicured courtyard toward the exclusive bridal tower. I was holding a small, delicate bouquet of white anemones, Rowan's favorite flower since we were children. I just wanted to give her a quiet moment of sisterhood before the chaos of the day consumed her entirely. I stepped off the elevator on the penthouse level, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of my heels. A stern-faced woman, holding a heavy digital tablet, blocked the double doors leading to the bridal suite. She offered a polite, professional smile that did not reach her eyes and asked for my name. "Sela Newman," I said, my grip tightening slightly on the stems of the flowers. The woman scrolled. She scrolled again. Her manicured fingernail tapped the screen. I am so sorry. Miss Newman, you are not on the cleared access list for the bridal preparations. I have strict instructions from the coordinator. Only the bridal party and the parents of the bride are permitted on this floor until the ceremony begins. I stood there for a long, heavy moment. The sweet scent of hairspray and the muffled sounds of laughter drifted through the heavy oak doors, completely out of my reach. I did not argue. I did not explain that I shared a bloodline with the woman inside. I simply nodded, turned around, and carried the white anemones back down to the lobby, dropping them into a stainless steel trash can near the concierge desk. The actual wedding ceremony was held outdoors on a sprawling, emerald green lawn overlooking the valley. The air was fragrant with imported jasmine. As the string quartet began to play, I made my way down the pristine white aisle runner, naturally heading toward the very front row reserved for immediate family. An usher in a sharp tuxedo stepped softly into my path. He glanced at his seating chart. I looked past his shoulder to the front row. There were exactly 4 velvet-cushioned chairs positioned behind the velvet rope. One for my mother, Elaine. One for my father, Martin. One for my brother, Cole, and one for Cole's girlfriend of exactly 6 months, a woman whose last name my parents barely knew. There was no 5th chair. The usher politely guided me back. Not to the 2nd row, not to the 3rd. I was escorted to row 6. I sat silently on a hard wooden folding chair directly behind a row of Rowan's casual work acquaintances from the creative studio and 2 of her former college roommates. For 45 minutes, I watched the back of my family's heads. Throughout the entire elaborate vow exchange, the ring blessing, and the final kiss, not a single one of them turned around to look for me. I was completely invisible in the bright midday sun. When the ceremony concluded, the guests were ushered toward the cocktail hour, leaving the family behind near the floral archway for formal portraits. I lingered near the edge of the lawn, smoothing the fabric of my slate blue dress, waiting for the photographer to call the siblings in. The photographer, a hyperactive man with 3 heavy cameras strapped to his chest, was aggressively arranging my parents, Cole, and the newlyweds. I took a tentative step forward onto the grass. The photographer immediately waved his hand at me, his face tight with impatience. "Excuse me, Miss in the blue dress, could you please step back? You are casting a shadow on the bride's train. We are just trying to get the core immediate family shots right now. Thank you." I froze. I looked directly at my mother. Elaine heard the photographer. She saw me standing there. She simply reached up, adjusted the diamond clip in her hair, and smiled radiantly into the camera lens. She did not correct him. That was the exact moment the tears stopped threatening to fall. The sharp, suffocating pain in my chest that I had been carrying for 7 months did not burst into a dramatic sob. Instead, it crystallized. It hardened into a solid, freezing block of ice. The frantic, desperate girl who just wanted to be loved by her family died right there on that manicured lawn. Something entirely different took her place. By the time the grand reception doors opened, I was entirely numb. The cinematic glamour of the ballroom felt like a hollow stage set. As I have already detailed, I found my place card with the phrase non-priority stamped beneath my name. I took my seat at table 42, pushed against the swinging kitchen doors. The reality of my assigned tier became glaringly obvious as the dinner service began. The centerpieces on the main tables were towering structures of white roses and imported orchids. My table featured a single, sad pillar candle floating in a shallow bowl of water. The waitstaff poured vintage champagne for the center of the room. They poured lukewarm tap water for us. An older, elegantly dressed couple sat across from me, looking slightly bewildered by their placement near the service exit. The gentleman smiled kindly at me over the rim of his water glass. "It is a beautiful event," he said warmly. "How do you know the bride and groom?" "My dear," I placed my linen napkin on my lap. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am the sister of the bride." The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately crashed down on our table was infinitely more humiliating than any spoken insult could ever be. The older woman's eyes widened in sheer horror. She looked from me, to my cheap placement, to the grand sweetheart table 100 feet away, and back to me. She did not know what to say. There was nothing to say. 10 minutes later, the servers brought out the main courses. I watched the VIP tables receive beautiful plates of seared filet mignon and butter-poached lobster tail. A tired waiter unceremoniously dropped a plate in front of me. It was a piece of dry, overcooked chicken breast resting on a bed of plain white rice. It was the heavily discounted vendor meal, the downgraded, alternate option for the hired help and the non-priority guests. I picked up my fork. I did not take a bite. I just stared at the dry chicken, and then I looked across the vast room. I watched my mother laughing brilliantly, holding her crystal glass high in the air as flashes from the cameras illuminated her face. I watched Cole slapping Andrew on the back. I watched Rowan glowing at the center of the universe. The final thread of my delusion snapped completely. This was not a logistical error. This was not wedding stress. This was a meticulously designed architecture of disrespect. They had successfully built their perfect, wealthy image on the sheer assumption that I would quietly fund it while absorbing their abuse. I set the fork down. I picked up my satin clutch and stood up from the table. My movements were slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of hesitation. I walked smoothly across the ballroom floor, weaving through the dancing couples and the laughing guests. I bypassed the bar. I bypassed the exit doors. I walked directly to the grand, velvet-draped gift table situated near the towering wedding cake. It was piled high with expensive boxes and thick envelopes. I opened my clutch. I pulled out the heavy, cream-colored envelope bearing their names in my careful handwriting. I did not tear it open. I simply unsealed the flap. I reached inside with 2 fingers and pulled out the crisp cashier's check for $15,000. I folded the heavy paper in half and slid it securely back into my own purse, from the small pocket of my clutch. I retrieved a black ink pen. I pulled the blank, stiff card out of the envelope, placed it against the hard surface of the table, and wrote a single, sharp sentence: "A gift follows honor." I slid the card back into the empty envelope, sealed it, and dropped it into the ornate, golden birdcage designated for monetary gifts. The empty envelope landed softly among the others. I turned around and walked out of the ballroom. The cool night air hit my face the second I pushed through the heavy glass lobby doors. I was halfway across the dimly lit asphalt parking lot, my keys jingling softly in my hand, when I heard the frantic, echoing clatter of heels running behind me. Sela, stop right there." I turned slowly. My mother was practically sprinting across the pavement, her emerald gown catching the harsh yellow light of the street lamps. Rowan was right behind her, hiking up the heavy layers of her white designer dress, her face twisted into a mask of absolute fury. They had clearly been tipped off by the coordinator watching the gift table. "What on earth are you doing?" Elaine hissed, her voice a venomous whisper as she closed the distance. "Leona just told me you tampered with the gift box. You are leaving before the father-daughter dance. Are you actively trying to embarrass this family in front of the Vales?" "Embarrass you?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The coldness inside me was absolute. It felt like a superpower. "You sat me by the kitchen doors. Mom, you fed me the vendor meal. You literally printed the words non-priority beneath my name for 200 people to see." "It was just a seating metric," Rowan screamed, her perfect bridal composure completely shattering. "You are ruining my wedding night over a piece of cardboard hand over the envelope. Sela, we need that check for the escrow on Monday. You promised." I looked at my sister, truly looked at her. I saw the pure, selfish panic in her eyes. It was not the panic of a sister losing a sibling. It was the panic of a debtor losing a vital asset. "I did not promise you anything," I replied, my tone flat and even. "You assumed. You labeled me a non-priority before the night even began. I am just agreeing with you. I am simply deciding that my $15,000 does not come with a complimentary side of public humiliation." "You cannot do this." Elaine gasped, her face turning pale under the makeup. The Vales are expecting that contribution you are going to make us look like liars. Then you better start practicing your apologies, I said, turning my back on them. I unlocked my car, the headlights flashing brightly against their shocked, horrified faces. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and locked it. I did not look back as I put the car in drive and pulled out of the Blackwood Crest resort, leaving them standing in the dark parking lot, screaming into the exhaust fumes. I woke up at 7 in the morning to a silent apartment and a phone that was vibrating so violently against my nightstand it sounded like an industrial drill. The morning light filtering through my cheap bedroom blinds was dull and gray, a stark, sobering contrast to the glittering, champagne-soaked nightmare of the previous night. I picked up the device. The glowing screen was an absolute war zone of urgent notifications. There were 24 missed calls and over 50 unread text messages, entirely from my mother, my brother, and my newly married sister. I opened my mother's message thread first. Elaine's texts were a masterful display of modern gaslighting, shifting seamlessly from maternal disappointment to outright character assassination. I cannot believe you would be so incredibly selfish on your sister's special day. The first long message read, to throw a childish tantrum over a simple catering metric and storm out before the cake was even cut. You embarrassed us in front of the entire Vale family. Sela, people were asking where you went. You need to apologize immediately and drop that envelope off at the hotel concierge desk before noon today so we can put this ugly incident behind us. My brother Cole's messages were entirely different in tone. They lacked Elaine's emotional manipulation and went straight for aggressive, baseless intimidation. You cannot just walk away with pledged capital, he had written at 2 in the morning. There are verbal agreements in place regarding that money. Withholding it now could cause serious legal issues for the escrow process. Call me the absolute second you wake up. But it was Rowan's text that truly froze the blood in my veins. My sister, waking up in a luxury bridal suite on the first morning of her new life, did not ask why I had left the reception. She did not ask why I felt humiliated, nor did she attempt to offer even a fake, face-saving apology for the terrible table placement near the kitchen doors. Her message consisted of exactly one sentence. How long are you planning to hold the check hostage? That was it. That was the entirety of her concern. My pain was completely invisible to her. Only my wallet mattered. As I stared at the glowing screen, the phone suddenly buzzed with an incoming call from Cole. I let it ring 4 times before I pressed accept and brought the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello. Listen to me very carefully. Sela? Cole barked immediately, his voice tight, exhausted, and lacking any of his usual smooth corporate polish. You need to stop this dramatic nonsense right now and drive back to the resort. We have a massive problem. I do not have a problem, I replied, my voice perfectly level and terrifyingly calm. I am sitting in my kitchen, drinking my coffee. Monday morning is the final confirmation for the condo escrow, Cole snapped, entirely ignoring my calmness. Andrew and Rowan have to wire the down payment tomorrow. The Vale family covered the furnishings and the closing costs, but they were explicitly led to believe the Newman family contribution was coming directly from your large gift. Mom told Lorraine Vale weeks ago that you were covering the financial gap, if that money does not hit Rowan's account by tomorrow morning. Andrew is going to find out the Newman side brought absolutely nothing to the table. The entire arrangement collapses. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, staring blindly at the blank wall of my kitchen. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it all was staggering. They had not just eagerly anticipated my financial sacrifice, they had actively spent it in the social economy long before I ever set foot in that ballroom. They had built an entire architecture of lies and promises on the foundation of my bank account. They had paraded my unseen labor around as their own generational wealth, while simultaneously ensuring I was pushed so far into the background that I could never claim any credit for the contribution. They needed my $15,000 to secure their place in high society. Yet they felt perfectly comfortable labeling me a non-priority and feeding me dry. Downgraded chicken by the service exit. You sold my money to buy yourselves a reputation, I said quietly into the receiver. You promised the Vales a fortune you did not possess, assuming you could just bleed it out of me while treating me like dirt. It is family. Selah. It is what you do, Cole shouted, his composure completely gone, revealing the desperate panic underneath. You fix things. Now fix this before you ruin her marriage on day one. I ended the call. I did not block his number. I wanted a digital record of his desperation. A few minutes later, my phone chimed softly with a new message. It was not from my blood relatives. It was from Andrew, my new brother-in-law. It was a long, polite paragraph, dripping with careful, upper-class diplomacy. Selah, I am so sorry about the seating mix-up last night. Andrew wrote, Rowan was devastated that you left early. She told me beforehand that you prefer to keep your distance from large family events, and that you did not want to be heavily involved in the core bridal activities. But I still feel terrible that the catering staff put you so far back in the room. Let us buy you a nice dinner when we get back from the trip to make up for it. I read the carefully typed words 3 times. The nausea rising in my stomach had absolutely nothing to do with the catering staff. Rowan had not just pushed me out of her bridal party, she had actively rewritten my entire personality for her new husband. She had packaged my forced exclusion and sold it to Andrew as my own personal preference for isolation. She made him believe I was an aloof, distant sister who wanted nothing to do with the celebration, neatly covering up the fact that I had spent the last 7 months doing all of their dirty logistical work. They had not just tried to steal my money and my dignity. They were actively trying to steal my reality. They were framing my humiliation as an unfortunate administrative error on a night I supposedly did not even want to attend. I placed the phone face down on the wooden table. My hands were shaking slightly, not from sorrow, but from a deep, tectonic shift of absolute, blinding rage. For 34 years, my default response to their cruelty had been to apologize. My instinct had always been to smooth things over, to explain myself, to offer more of my time, my energy, and my money just to keep the fragile peace in the house. I reached out to pick up the phone, fully intending to type out a furious, undeniable defense to Andrew, to blow up the entire lie right then and there. But before my fingers could touch the glass, the screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number. Miss Newman, this is Abby Kerr. I am the assistant coordinator from Leona Price Events. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering in the air. A second message immediately followed. I saw what happened last night at the gift table. I just want you to know that the label on your place card was not a printing error, and your table assignment was not a logistical mix-up by the venue. I have the email threads and the approved seating charts. If you want to see the proof, let me know. The breath caught sharply in my throat. I had known in my bones that the cruelty was deliberate. But having an outsider, a professional who had been inside their private planning room, validate that truth felt like a physical electric shock. It was the absolute confirmation I needed. For once, I did not respond to my family's manufactured emotional crises. I did not text my mother to soothe her bruised ego. I did not text Cole to argue about his fake legalities. I did not text Rowan to beg for basic sisterly affection or explain my broken heart. I opened the text message from Abby Kerr and typed a single, decisive line: where and when can we meet? I was no longer interested in defending my feelings to people who did not care about them. I was going to collect the receipts. I met Abby Kerr at a small independent coffee shop on the quiet edge of the Arts District at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The rain was drumming a steady, relentless rhythm against the large plate glass window, blurring the city traffic outside into streaks of gray and red. Abby was already sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as I slid into the wooden booth across from her. She did not work for my family. But in the high-stakes world of luxury event planning, Breaking client confidentiality was a massive professional risk. I did not order a drink. I simply looked at her and waited. "I have been doing this job for 4 years," Abby said, her voice low and steady over the ambient noise of the espresso machines. "I have seen bridezillas. I have seen mother-in-law drama. I have seen screaming matches over floral budgets. But I have never seen a family actively, clinically design a strategy to humiliate their own blood while simultaneously banking on their money." She opened her sleek silver laptop, typed in her password, and turned the screen to face me. My eyes immediately locked onto the bright screen. It was an email thread between my sister and Leona Price, the primary wedding planner. The date stamp indicated it was sent exactly 1 month before the wedding. I read the words with the exact same detached, surgical precision I used when auditing a fraudulent corporate contract at work. "Leona," my sister had written, "regarding the final floor plan, please ensure Sela is seated entirely outside the primary camera angles. Use the non-priority tier for her placement and issue her the alternate vendor menu to save on the per-head catering cost. Additionally, ensure her name is strictly removed from the bridal floor access list for the morning of the wedding. She does not match the energy we are curating for the behind-the-scenes footage." I read the paragraph twice. There was no emotion in Rowan's digital voice. It was a cold, administrative directive. She had casually downgraded my basic human dignity to save a few dollars on a catering plate and protect her aesthetic vision. Abby reached across the table and tapped the trackpad. "Now look at this one. This is from your mother." Leona actually pushed back on the seating arrangement, warning Elaine that putting an immediate family member by the kitchen doors usually results in a public scene. "This was your mother's direct response." The screen shifted to a captured image of a text message conversation. Elaine's contact name was clearly visible at the top. "Do not worry about any potential seating friction," my mother had texted the planner. "Sela will never make a scene, and she will still hand over the house fund envelope regardless of where she sits. She always desperately needs to feel useful to the family. Just execute the plan." I stared at the glowing pixels. A strange, total absolute calm washed over me. It was the absolute death of hope, and it was incredibly freeing. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was a highly predictable, easily manipulated revenue stream. They had calculated my emotional desperation and factored it into their event budget. I thanked Abby, paid for her coffee, and walked out into the cold rain. When I finally returned to my quiet apartment at 4 o'clock, I dropped my wet coat on the floor. My phone buzzed in my purse. The caller identification displayed a name that made me pause. Lorraine Vale, the mother of the groom. I answered the call on the second ring. "Hello, Lorraine?" "Sela," Lorraine said. Her voice was stripped of its usual aristocratic, polite warmth. It sounded sharp, tired, and deeply troubled. "I am calling you directly because I refuse to participate in whatever elaborate theatrical production your mother is attempting to stage today. I thought what happened to you at the reception last night was a terrible, isolated mistake. I tried to convince myself it was just extreme logistical incompetence, but I cannot accept that anymore." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "What changed your mind?" "Your mother," Lorraine replied, her tone dripping with a refined but unmistakable disgust. "Elaine has been leaving frantic voicemails on my private line all morning, trying to do damage control. But she forgot something crucial. Exactly 3 weeks ago. She took me out to an extravagant lunch. During that lunch, she explicitly boasted that your massive financial contribution was the primary asset securing the down payment for the new condo. She made it sound as though the Newman family was matching our financial support dollar for dollar, using your name as the absolute guarantee." The final, ugly piece of the puzzle locked into place with a sickening click. "They used me to buy their way into your social bracket," I said, the truth finally sounding clear and undeniable when spoken aloud. "They did," Lorraine confirmed bluntly. "They used your name and your invisible money to create a total illusion of financial parity with my family, while simultaneously treating you like a disposable servant in front of my guests. It is the most classless, abhorrent behavior I have ever witnessed. Andrew is furious. But Rowan is currently feeding him a completely different narrative. You need to know exactly what you are dealing with. I know exactly what I am dealing with now, I told her quietly. Thank you for telling me. After the call ended, I sat down at my small dining table and opened my laptop. I synced my phone to the computer and pulled up my entire digital archive of family communications. I was no longer looking for apologies. I was hunting for the established pattern. I stripped away my desperate need for their love and looked at the raw data without flinching. The pattern was glaringly, terrifyingly obvious. I opened text threads dating back 3 years. Every single time they needed a flawless image projected, or a messy, complicated problem solved. My phone rang. I was the crisis manager, but every single time there was a moment of glory, a celebration, or a public victory. I was meticulously cropped out of the frame. Then, I found the final nail in the coffin. I dug into a massive, chaotic family group chat that I had muted months ago because of the endless wedding spam. I used the search function to filter by my own name. A message from Cole appeared. It was sent to Rowan and Elaine just 2 days before the rehearsal dinner. Should we casually drop the detail about Sela's $15,000 at the rehearsal brunch? Cole had asked them. If we announce her gift publicly in front of Andrew's parents, it will completely lock in the expectations with the Vale family. It guarantees our side looks comparable in terms of capital. A massive, suffocating wave of clarity hit me. This was the ultimate twist. I had spent my entire adult life believing my family simply did not know how to love me properly. I thought I was just emotionally disregarded because I was too quiet or too independent. But the truth was far more sinister and calculated. I had been entirely weaponized. I was not a person to them. I was a financial prop for a strategic marriage. I was a prop in their performance of wealth and status. They knew exactly how much I craved their approval, and they used that vulnerability to extract money from me, planning to discard me the moment the check cleared their bank account. I closed the laptop. My apartment was completely silent. A lesser person, or perhaps a more dramatic one, would have immediately taken screenshots of everything. They would have posted the emails, the texts, and the catering invoices on social media, tagging every single member of the bridal party and the extended family. They would have burned the Newman family image to the ground in the public square. But I am a contracts compliance analyst. I do not do public screaming matches. I do not do social media rants or emotional pleas for sympathy on the internet. I deal strictly in hard documentation, undeniable facts, and closed-door audits. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of calling me crazy or emotional on the internet. I wanted the liars to sit in a quiet room, look directly at their own printed paperwork, and realize that the person they thought was completely powerless was actually holding the entire structural integrity of their fake lives in her hands. I reached for my phone and opened a fresh text message addressed to my mother, my father, Cole, and Rowan. We are going to have a private, in-person conversation to resolve this, I typed, making sure my tone was perfectly neutral. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, at the family house. Everyone needs to be there. I hit send. I did not wait for their replies. I had a lot of printing to do. The message I had sent proposing a private talk to clear the air at our parents' house over the weekend was met with immediate, predictable relief from my mother. In Elaine's highly curated universe, a request for a formal family dinner signaled a full surrender. She firmly believed that my anger was simply a temporary emotional flare-up, a minor inconvenience that could be easily smothered by the correct atmosphere and a perfectly roasted tenderloin. She assumed I had spent the last 48 hours cooling off, realizing the absolute gravity of my social error, and was now returning to the fold to hand over the $15,000 check. I knew exactly how she would prepare for this Saturday evening gathering. Elaine treated every interpersonal conflict like a high-stakes public relations event. If the physical setting was beautiful enough, the ugly reality underneath simply ceased to exist. I could easily picture her pacing the expanse of her formal dining room, meticulously adjusting the linen napkins, selecting the heavy silver flatware, and instructing the housekeeper to polish the crystal wine glasses twice. She would arrange a centerpiece of white hydrangeas, low enough to encourage conversation, but expensive enough to assert dominance. In her mind, the pristine beauty of the table would effectively control the content of the conversation. It was the exact same tactic she had employed her entire life to avoid dealing with the rotting foundation of our family. My brother was operating under a very similar, equally flawed assumption, though his approach was entirely transactional. On Friday afternoon, my phone screen briefly lit up with a text message notification. It was from Cole, accidentally sent to the lingering wedding group chat before he frantically deleted it 2 seconds later. But 2 seconds was more than enough time for my eyes to capture the words on my lock screen before they vanished. Just make sure you keep Andrew completely calm through the appetizers. Cole had written to Rowan, once we pour the good wine, we can easily talk her out of being so emotional about the seating thing. We just need to close the gap on the escrow. I stared at the empty notification badge. He did not see a deeply wounded sister coming to seek closure. He saw a volatile business negotiation that needed to be aggressively managed, in his mind. My pain was just an irritating variable in a mathematical equation he was desperately trying to balance. However, not everyone in the family was operating with such arrogant blindness. The first genuine crack in their united front did not happen in the dining room. It happened on a cold sidewalk outside my office building on Friday evening. I was walking toward the parking garage, my briefcase heavy against my side, when I saw a familiar luxury sedan idling by the curb. The driver's side door opened, and my father stepped out into the chilly wind. Martin Newman was a man who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of blending into the background of his own life. He was chronically non-confrontational, a silent ghost who nodded along to Elaine's dictates simply to preserve his own peace. He looked significantly older than I remembered. He stood awkwardly by the hood of his car, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive wool overcoat. He did not offer a hug. "I received your message about the dinner tomorrow," he began, his voice barely rising above the sound of the passing city traffic. He looked down at the concrete pavement, entirely unable to meet my eyes. "I just wanted to catch you before you walked into that house." I stopped a few feet away from him. "What do you want?" "Dad." He took a slow, labored breath. "I need to tell you something, before all the shouting starts tomorrow. I saw the planner's spreadsheet, the guest tier file. I saw it on your mother's computer 3 weeks ago." The evening air suddenly felt razor-sharp in my lungs. I had assumed he was just blindly oblivious, happily riding the wave of my mother's aggressive social maneuvering. But he knew. He knew exactly what they were planning to do to me long before the wedding day arrived. "You saw the non-priority label," I stated. It was not a question. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping under the invisible weight of his own cowardice. "I saw it. I saw the alternate menu designation. I asked Elaine about it." He paused, swallowing hard. "She told me it was just a temporary placeholder for the caterers. She said she would handle it and fix it before the final print run. I chose to believe her because pushing back against your mother when she is planning an event is unbearable. I took the easy way out. I let it happen." His late confession did not erase the profound insult, nor did it magically heal the fracture between us. But it fundamentally shifted the coming confrontation. His admission proved that the united, flawless front my family always projected was starting to crack from the inside. "Choosing to believe a comfortable lie does not make you innocent," I told him quietly, gripping the leather handle of my briefcase. "It just makes you an accomplice. I will see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I walked past him and did not look back. The second unexpected fracture occurred later that same night. I was sitting at my kitchen table, organizing my files, when my phone rang. The caller identification showed Andrew Vale's name. I answered on the first ring. "Hello, Andrew." "Sela," he said. His voice lacked the polished, easygoing charm he usually carried. It was tight, analytical, and heavily guarded. He sounded like a man who had just discovered the floor beneath him was made of rotting wood. Lorraine told me about her private phone call with you. She also told me about a very interesting lunch she had with your mother last month regarding the financing of our new condominium. I imagine that was an incredibly difficult conversation for you to have. I replied smoothly. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background, perhaps from the living room of their luxury hotel suite. I am a very straightforward person, Andrew finally said, his tone dropping an octave. I do not play social games, and I absolutely despise being manipulated. I just need you to answer one single question for me before we walk into your parents' house tomorrow night. He paused, and I could hear the genuine betrayal lacing his words. From the very beginning, have I been living in a completely prepackaged, manufactured version of this family? Have they been feeding me a script? I closed my eyes. I thought about Rowan framing my forced isolation as an introverted personality trait. I thought about Elaine parading my unseen labor as Newman family wealth. I am not going to give you an emotional answer. Andrew, I said clearly, I am an analyst. I deal in hard data. Tomorrow night, I will not ask you to believe my feelings over your wife's tears. I will simply hand you the documentation, and you can decide for yourself exactly what kind of family you just married into. He exhaled a long breath. I understand. We will be there at 7. When the call disconnected, I turned my absolute attention back to the dining table. It was time to build the dossier. I opened my laptop and connected to my wireless printer. For the next 3 hours, my apartment was filled with the steady, rhythmic mechanical hum of printing paper. I did not print out angry journal entries or desperate text messages begging for their affection. I printed pure, undeniable liability. I printed the full email thread from Abby Kerr, highlighting Rowan's exact directive to place me outside the camera angles and use the non-priority tier. I printed the screenshot of Elaine's text message explicitly confirming I would still deliver the house fund, despite being actively humiliated. I printed the digital receipt for the $800 wire transfer I had sent to Cole for the bachelor party liquor, alongside the unanswered text messages requesting repayment. I printed the catering invoice demonstrating the exact price difference between the standard wedding meal and the downgraded vendor plate I was served. I took every single sheet of warm, crisp paper and meticulously arranged them in chronological order. I slid them into a thick, black professional compliance folder, the kind of folder I used when presenting evidence of severe corporate fraud to a board of directors. It was heavy, neat, and absolutely devastating. I stood up and walked into my bedroom. I retrieved the cream-colored envelope containing the $15,000 cashier's check from my nightstand drawer. I walked back into the kitchen and placed the sealed envelope directly next to the black compliance folder on the wooden table. I stood there in the quiet apartment, looking down at the two objects. They represented two entirely different versions of my life. The check represented the old version of myself, the desperately compliant daughter, the convenient sister, the woman who was willing to literally bankrupt herself just to buy a fleeting, pathetic illusion of love. The black folder represented the new reality, a reality built on cold, undeniable boundaries and absolute self-respect. I stared at the two items side by side under the harsh kitchen light. My family was expecting me to walk through their front door tomorrow evening, carrying apologies and massive amounts of capital. They fully expected the check. I reached out, resting my hand flat against the cool, smooth cover of the black folder. I made my final decision. Tomorrow night. Only one of these items was going with me into that dining room. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. The formal dining room was a masterclass in aggressive, weaponized hospitality. The crystal wine glasses caught the warm light of the chandelier. The heavy silver flatware was perfectly aligned, and the scent of a slow-roasted tenderloin filled the air. It was the exact environment my mother always used to suffocate the truth. Andrew sat rigidly at the far end of the long mahogany table, to my mild surprise. but absolute satisfaction. His mother, Lorraine Vale, sat in the chair directly next to him. Andrew had clearly insisted on bringing his own witness to this reckoning. My brother Cole sat across from them, his posture tense and predatory. Rowan sat near the head of the table, resting her chin on her hand, projecting the image of a deeply exhausted, fragile victim. My father, Martin, stared blankly at his empty water glass. My mother, Elaine, took her position at the head of the table and immediately deployed her sweetest, most condescending voice. "I am so glad we are all here together," Elaine began, offering a tight, manufactured smile. Emotions ran incredibly high this weekend. Mistakes were made on all sides, but we are family. It is time for us all to be mature, put our feelings aside, and step forward into the future. Rowan sighed heavily, rubbing her temples as if the mere act of sitting in the room was physically draining her. "I have barely slept in 2 days," she murmured, ensuring Andrew could hear the tremor in her voice. "This is supposed to be the absolute happiest week of my life. Instead, I am dealing with all of this heavy, negative energy. I have been hurt the most by this entire situation." I did not pull out my chair. I remained standing at the opposite end of the table. I placed the thick black compliance folder directly onto the pristine white linen tablecloth. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked directly at my sister. I did not raise my voice. I asked one single, surgical question. "Who promised my money for the escrow on your new condominium before asking me a single word about it?" The entire table completely froze. The manufactured grace of the room evaporated instantly. Cole leaned forward, his corporate instincts taking over, immediately trying to mitigate the damage. "Sela, come on. We did not need to ask. Everyone completely understood that you would help out with the capital. It was a given." Rowan looked nervously at Andrew, her eyes wide. Andrew implicitly knew the financial support was coming from our side. It was not a secret. "Sela, we just assumed." Elaine quickly jumped in, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "You have always been so incredibly generous with your siblings. Darling, we knew you wanted to be a fundamental part of their new life. We were just relying on your good heart." I let their answers hang in the dead, silent air of the dining room. In less than 60 seconds, they had successfully validated my entire premise. They had openly admitted that they viewed my bank account as a default family asset, a public resource they could pledge to outsiders without my consent. "You relied on my money," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature, while simultaneously ensuring I was completely stripped of my dignity. "Let us look at exactly how much you value my good heart." I opened the black folder. The sharp snap of the metal rings echoed loudly in the quiet room. I pulled out the first document and slid it directly down the center of the polished wood, stopping right in front of Andrew and Lorraine. "This is an email sent by Rowan to her wedding planner 1 month ago," I stated clearly. "It explicitly instructs the coordinator to place me at a table outside of all primary camera angles. It demands that I be placed in the non-priority tier. It also strictly bans me from entering the bridal preparation floor." Rowan's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I pulled out the second sheet of paper and placed it next to the first. "This is the catering invoice. It details the exact price difference between the filet mignon you served your guests and the downgraded vendor meal you specifically ordered for me to save on your budget." Cole shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Elaine gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning stark white. I pulled out the third document. This is a text message sent by Elaine to the planner, overriding the planner's professional warning that seating me by the kitchen doors would cause a scene. Elaine explicitly stated that I would quietly accept the humiliation and still deliver the house fund envelope because I am, in her exact words, desperate to feel useful. A sharp, audible gasp escaped Lorraine's lips. She looked at my mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. I pulled out the final piece of paper and dropped it onto the pile. "And this is a message from Cole. asking if he should publicly announce my $15,000 gift at the rehearsal brunch. His goal was simple: use my money to make the Newman family look equal to the Vales. I looked at Andrew. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched near his ear. He looked from the papers to his new wife, and the absolute betrayal in his eyes was devastating to witness. Andrew and Lorraine understood the horrifying reality in the exact same second. The public humiliation at the reception and the grand financial promises were not two separate issues. They were a single, highly coordinated strategy. My family had built an elaborate trap, firmly believing I was too cowardly and too desperate for their love to ever bite back. Before anyone could formulate a lie to counter the printed evidence, a rough, broken voice broke the silence. "She is telling the absolute truth." Everyone turned to look at my father. Martin Newman slowly stood up from his chair. He looked directly at Andrew, his face aged by sudden, crushing shame. "I saw the seeding tears weeks before the wedding," my father confessed, his voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I saw the labels. I knew exactly what Elaine and Rowan were planning to do to her. I saw it, and I stayed completely silent because I am a coward. Seela did not invent any of this. We did this to her." The room felt incredibly heavy. My father's unprecedented confession shattered the final, lingering illusion. It completely validated my reality and destroyed their defense. Cornered, stripped of her lies, and watching her perfect image burn to the ground, Rowan finally snapped. The mask of the sweet, exhausted bride fell away, revealing the cruel, entitled core underneath. "Because you do not fit in," Rowan screamed, slamming her hands down on the table. Her face was red, her eyes wild with furious panic. "You do not fit the picture at the family table. Seela, you are too serious, too stiff, and you would make all the wedding photos feel heavy. I wanted my day to look flawless, and you simply did not look the part." The silence that followed her outburst was absolute. Rowan had just dug her own grave. In a desperate attempt to defend herself, she had accidentally confessed to the pure, malicious intent behind every single decision. Andrew slowly stood up from his chair. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. His calmness was far more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. "I am calling my attorney first thing on Monday morning," Andrew said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He looked down at Rowan as if she were a complete stranger. "I am stopping the escrow process on the condominium immediately. I am absolutely not merging my finances with yours, and I refuse to build my life on a foundation of cruel lies and financial manipulation." Lorraine stood up beside her son, her posture rigid with aristocratic fury. She looked directly at Elaine. "The Vale family will never enable this kind of abhorrent behavior. You tried to build your image on this young woman's money and humiliation. Do not ever contact me again." Elaine frantically scrambled to regain control, her eyes darting around the collapsing room. She pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "Look at what you have done. You have completely destroyed your sister's life. You ruined everything because you could not just be a supportive family member." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold pity, for the first time. Her gaslighting completely failed to find a target. No one in that room viewed me as the villain anymore. I was not the person who caused the disaster. I was simply the person who read the contract out loud when everyone else assumed I would just blindly sign it. I picked up the empty black folder. The cashier's check was safely locked away in my apartment. "I did not ruin anything," I said quietly. "I am just taking my $15,000 and going home." I turned my back on them and walked out the front door before they could even attempt to write a new narrative. 5 months later, the weather in Columbus turned warm and bright. The air smelled like fresh rain and blooming trees. I used that exact $15,000 as the foundation for the down payment on a beautiful, light-filled townhouse of my very own, reserving a substantial portion to establish a genuine emergency fund for myself. I walked into my new home office, carrying a small cardboard box of desk supplies. I placed my newly minted promotion letter from Northline Civic Benefits Group onto the center of the wooden desk, right next to the heavy brass keys for my new home. I set down a small embossed piece of ivory cardstock. Sela Newman, non-priority. I looked at the card, running my thumb over the gold foil lettering. I opened the thick, leather-bound folder containing the closing documents for my new house, and I smoothly slid the place card right inside. That little piece of paper was once used by people who hated me to dictate exactly where I was forced to sit. Now, it marks the exact moment I finally decided that from this day forward, I am the only person who gets to write my priorities. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. Please let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and hype it up so more people can hear this story.